when you get a book put in your hands and you open it up immediately and have a hard time putting it down, chances are that's a good book. That's exactly what happened when somebody put this new book in my arms, The Age of Edison, Electric Light and the Invention of Modern America. The author, Ernest Freeburg, is our guest. Ernest, welcome to KTRS here in St. Louis.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here.
It's a great idea for a story, and that is electric light and how it transformed America. Take us back to Menlo Park when Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. Tell us. Well, first of all, how did you come across this? And what was the reason for writing the book?
Well, partly because I think it's one of the most important inventions that we easily forget. We notice it when the lights go out, and we have a sense that our energy is drained, and so many things that we're used to being able to do are harder to do without electric light. But mostly it's just there in the background. It's designed to be there in the background. And I think it's really one of the most important legacies of the late 19th century that we've inherited, and so it's worth pulling it up and thinking about. I think we can see it better when it arrived than we can around us today in some ways.
It's really fascinating. We just have no concept of what it's like until it's not there, and how it transformed America. Right after the Civil War, what was the year? 1870-something he invented it?
Yeah, his first unveiling was New Year's Eve, 1879.
And what did people think when they first saw it?
They found it to be incredibly beautiful. That's one of the surprising things I found. It wasn't just that it was useful, but they just loved the look of it. The first light bulbs, they described them as looking like an Italian sunset, or the diamond facets, and they were especially loved the fact that it didn't flicker. Every light up till that point had been a flame that flickered, and they loved the sort of steadiness of the light and the cleanness of the light. People were immediately drawn to the quality of electric light. Again, something we don't even stop and think about at this point.
The book is called The Age of Edison, Electric Light and the Invention of Modern America. Okay, great. He invented it. Did they ask the million-dollar question, great, what can we use it for?
Well, it was understood that the country was hungry for light. People were investing a lot of money to have gas light in their homes and in their streets. So people knew there was a market for light. In fact, people put up with some terrible side effects in order to have gas light. And that it stank. It filled up the rooms with noxious fumes. It sucked the oxygen out of the room. People hated gas light, but they couldn't do without the light. So Edison knew that if he could provide a product that was at least roughly the same price, that he had a massive market on his hands. So the target really was to replace gas light. I think part of what's interesting about electric light is it's so much more flexible that it did a lot of things that gas light couldn't do. Many inventors found all sorts of ways to adapt it that Edison himself couldn't have possibly anticipated. And
that light bulb pretty much relatively unchanged until maybe the last 10 years or so, right?
Well, one big change occurred when metallic filaments came in the early 20th century. Those were so much brighter and more efficient that was really the time when electric companies could compete with gas companies. So that it took quite a long time. I mean, the light spread very quickly across the country in lots of places. But in terms of people putting it into their homes, it was a big investment to have electric light, and it really wasn't until the 1920s, 40 years later, that most homes were starting to be wired. The book is called The Age of Edison, Electric Light and the Invention of Modern America. It's a book that you cannot put down. Ernest Freeburg, our guest. When something is invented like that, and it takes the place of, you say, gas, the controlling gas interests of the time probably weren't happy with this invention. Not at all, and they loved to spread stories about how dangerous electricity was, and which it certainly was, because there were no safety regulations. They figured out how to create electric wires, but not how to create electric insulation. Especially with the more high-powered AC wires that they started to put up in cities, many people got electrocuted, and gas companies loved to gather those stories and publish them in their newspapers.
When was it 40 years later, as you said, before electricity really became safe?
It took quite a long time. Yeah, first it was the insurance companies that got involved. They got tired of paying for buildings that were burning down in many major cities. One of my favorite stories comes from St. Louis, where they flipped on the switch for the lights, and the wires had somehow crossed with the telephone system, and telephones all across St. Louis erupted in flames, and people were having to throw their telephones into buckets of water to stop the fires. All sorts of unintended consequences as they were trying to work out this system, and it took decades, and before the finally state regulations and the sort of professionalization of the process was completed.
So rich people who had phones woke up one day and their phone was on fire.
Yeah. Or emitting blue sparks.
That's a good one. That's one that I haven't heard.
Every operator in St. Louis at the switchboard was in deadly danger of getting a serious shock.
So when they say your phone is blowing up, they weren't kidding years ago, were they? The book is called The Age of Edison, Electric Light and the Invention of Modern America. Was J.P. Morgan involved with Thomas Edison?
He was. He was one of the important investors. Edison's one of his greatest accomplishments, it's often said, is that he invented a new style of invention. At Menlo Park, he assembled a team of people he could work with. Many of them had skills that Edison did not, either technical skills or else higher mathematical skills. So Edison took a lot of capital and a team, and worked very intensely and systematically on a series of inventions. And J.P. Morgan was very crucial to that. He was also crucial in sort of taking the lighting away from Edison when he formed General Electric about a decade later, and essentially bought Edison out. And Edison, a decade after he had launched his first lights, he was sort of out of the lighting business for the rest of his career.
Really? So Thomas Edison invented it, but was bought out, was sort of sold it? And, I mean, is that one of those classic examples of the inventor is sort of axed out of the benefits of his invention?
Well, he certainly benefited in terms of getting a large payout, and he invested that money into a new laboratory and a series of inventions. And to some extent, that's what he preferred to do. Edison's mistake was that he was convinced that AC power was much more dangerous, and his system used the DC power, which was less dangerous, easier to make it safe. And so as a result, he sort of bet on the wrong horse, and J.P. Morgan recognized that and sort of bought out Edison's patents and consolidated General Electric, and Edison went off to do other things.
Yeah, talk about that for a moment, because that's a big argument, is it not, going forward in the advent of electricity, AC versus DC? That was the sort of VCR versus beta back in the 80s, right?
That's right. And it really, the modern electric grid, I mean, Edison was well ahead of his time in thinking about the idea of a central power station distributed across multiple city blocks. But with that DC power system, you would have to have a new power station about every 5 or 6 city blocks. Whereas with AC power, you could have a large, powerful energy source and distribute it very efficiently across a large space, and then use transformers to bring it down to a usable level at the household level. So that was ultimately the most efficient, but it was also, Edison's view was that also is the most dangerous, and until you can make it safe, the American consumer is going to decide not to put electricity in their house if people are being electrocuted in the streets.
Interesting. So ultimately, it wasn't as simple as we all make it out to be now. There was a real legitimate concern if the gas companies are talking about how unsafe it is. He wanted to go with the safest form.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Ernest Freeburg, our guest. The book is The Age of Edison, Electric Light and the Invention of Modern America, getting a lot of talk and attention these last week or so. Ernest Freeburg, the book, The Age of Edison, electric light and the invention of modern America. Take me back to how he invented it. How far advanced was he? Was it a stroke of genius? Was it dumb luck? How did he invent the light bulb?
Well, when he was started to work at this in the late 1870s, there were many people on the same trail. Many people recognized that the key to this was a vacuum bulb, that a carbon filament was going to be the way to go. So Edison was really one of 5 or 6 competitors. In fact, many of them created a working electric light bulb before he did, and got important patents before he did. So he learned from them. Some of them accused him of stealing their ideas, and vice versa, because it was an intensely competitive thing. Everybody recognized that this was going to happen. Edison's genius, as such, was that he had the team, and he had worked out not just the light bulb, but an entire lighting system that included a much improved, more efficient dynamo, the distribution of power across a grid. He even worked out the meters so that he could charge customers for the amount of current they were using. He figured all those things out, and as a result, he emerged as the person who was really capable of putting this into the streets and putting it into competition with gaslight ahead of his competitors. Ernest
Freeburg, our guest. The book is The Age of Edison. How much of Thomas Edison is PR? In other words, how much true credit does he get for inventing it, and how much is it the public relations machine at the time deemed him to be the winner?
Well, it was public relations. Edison was a great manipulator of his own image. He was a folksy guy who liked to tell jokes and entertain reporters and smoke cigars with them, and he recognized that was an important part of his appeal, and this idea that he was a wizard. He'd created the phonograph, and so he already had a worldwide reputation as a great inventor. And I think he understood that was very important in order to, first of all, get customers to trust him, to invest in his system, and in order to win the big patent fights to claim that this was his invention. But this was invented by many people, and that's part of what I try to explore in the book, is that invention is actually, it's the same thing we do with computers. We tend to think that somehow the personal computer was given to us by Steve Jobs and Bill Gates.
Right.
When in fact, if we stop and think about it, we recognize that this is an enormously complicated process with many, many inventors, and and it's still being invented in a sense.
Yeah, Ernest, the book is The Age of Edison. A couple more minutes with you here. The Age of Edison: Electric Light and the Invention of Modern America. Ernest Freeburg, our guest. How does the light bulb change America, and how fast does that change come?
Well, it very quickly accelerated urbanization. It accelerated the work day, both in good ways and bad ways. This was the birth of the consumer economy, of a 24/7 delivery system around the country, and that was made possible by electric light, making train travel and sea travel much safer and much faster than it had been, and allowing things like rail depots and so forth to be operating 24 hours a day. So the entire economy accelerated as a result of being able to take advantage of the extra hours of light. And at the same time, people are working much harder, but they're also enjoying a new nightlife. When they do manage to get off work, the cities are increasingly filled with amusement parks and all-night restaurants and any number of things. Theaters are very quick adopters of electric light. So there's an energy, almost an addictive stimulant about electric light. I think we notice that when the lights go out, and it feels like somebody's sucked the air out of the room, and things get very slow.
You write that Americans were like a moth to a flame, migrating to the urban centers, leaving behind rural America.
This was an important period of transition in the country. The United States had considered itself to be a nation of small land-holding farmers, and the cities were somehow alien to American identity. But in this period, America became urban, and the visibility of electric light in a lot of ways marked where the excitement, where the future was, and those left behind increasingly felt very much left behind. Like there was something going on out there that was a lot more exciting. Many people left rural areas and moved to the cities in this period, partly in search of work because of the economic growth, but also because of all these amazing nightlife opportunities that were available.
Because of the invention of the light bulb, kerosene oil markets plummet. And is it true they have to come up with a new oil, and they come up with gasoline oil to help then build steel and so on and so forth and all that? I mean, is that as simple as it gets?
Well, there was a lot of innovation. They were people trying to. Kerosene is improved and perfected. Gaslight, which was clearly inferior, got much better as a result of competition from electric light, and held its own. If you were a person on a budget in urban America up through the 1920s, chances are pretty good that you still had gas light at home because electric light was pretty expensive.
That's just an amazing story. The book is The Age of Edison, Electric Light and the Invention of Modern America, something we take for granted every single day, and we complain when we can't find an outlet for our cell phone, and our battery in our cell phone just isn't what it used to be. Ernest Freeburg, you take us all the way back to the beginning of electricity with The Age of Edison. It's a must-read, Electric Light and the Invention of Modern America. Ernest Freeburg, thank you for your time. Good luck, and good luck with the book.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You got it. Back in a moment on the Big 550 KTRS.